Hi again, Mark here from Talkingbass.net. This week I'm going to be looking at the two most useful and flexible scales that you can ever learn on bass, and that's the major and minor pentatonic scales. Now, as the name suggests, pentatonic scales are simply scales made up of 5 notes, so there are literally hundreds of possible pentatonic scales, but the two most common ones are the major and minor pentatonics, which we'll be looking at today, and these are super useful, as I'll show you in a second. So first, let's just look at a simple 1-octave pattern for each scale, starting on a root note of C to make things easy. So first we have the C major pentatonic scale, which looks like this. Okay, so that's going to be the notes C, D, E, G, A and C. So that's 3rd fret, 5th fret, A string, 2nd fret, 5th fret, D string, and 2nd fret, 5th fret, G string. You want to play up and back down. Okay, so that's the major pentatonic pattern. And then you want to play that in different positions on the neck, you know, starting from different root notes. So one thing you can do is just take that pattern and then just work it up 1 fret at a time up the neck. So then you play it on the C sharp, D, E flat, and just work your way all the way up to the C there, 15th fret of the A string, and then just work your way back down. B, B flat, A, all the way back down to C. So that's just one way of practicing it around the neck. And then you could try the same thing starting on a G maybe, down on the 3rd fret of the E string, and work your way up again. Okay, so just a kind of mindless practice just to get that pattern under your fingers. Next we have the C minor pentatonic scale, which looks like this. So we have the notes C, E flat, F, G, B flat and C. So 3rd fret, 6th fret, A string, 3rd fret, 5th fret, D string, and 3rd fret, 5th fret, G string. Play up and back down. Okay, so that's the C minor pentatonic, and again, just like with the major pentatonic, you can play it up and down the neck. C sharp, D, E flat, E, all the way up to C and back, then G, all the way up to G and back. Again, just to get that pattern under your fingers. So these two scales might look vaguely familiar if you've already learned the major and natural minor scales. The major pentatonic is the same as the major scale, but we're missing the 4th and the 7th degrees. The minor pentatonic is the same as the natural minor, but we're missing the 2nd and the 6th degrees. Now, these missing notes actually help with the flexibility of the pentatonic scales because we don't have to be as wary when we're applying them. I won't get into the music theory side of all that stuff in this lesson, but all you have to know is that the major pentatonic scales can be used over most major type chords, including the dominant 7, and the minor pentatonic scales can be used over the minor type chords. There are loads of riffs that use these pentatonic scales. For instance, you might know this classic rock and roll bass line which uses the major pentatonic. Or you might know this classic rock riff by Deep Purple, Black Knight, which uses the minor pentatonic. Okay? Now, these pentatonics have a certain sound that makes them great for coming up with catchy, singable riffs. So just try messing around with them and get creative by coming up with your own basic riffs. Experimenting and playing around with scales is great practice and helps you to grow accustomed to the sounds that are in there. Now, as I mentioned, these scales are really flexible in that we can use them for creating bass lines over chord progressions. So let's take a chord progression that uses both major and minor type chords. We'll use a track from my Chord Tone Essentials course in the key of C, made up of C major 7, A minor 7, D minor 7, and G7. So I'll just play the track and I'll just play along with a bass line, just using the root notes to begin with, okay? So, C major 7 to begin with. A minor. D minor 7, Now let's try applying our pentatonic scales. So for the C major 7 chord, I can use the C major pentatonic scale. So we have. Then for the A minor 7 chord, I can use the A minor pentatonic scale. Then for the D minor 7 chord, I can use the D minor pentatonic scale. And then for the G7, I can use the G major pentatonic scale. So the reason that we can use a major pentatonic over the dominant 7 chord is because dominant 7 chords are built from a foundation of a major triad. So if you know anything about harmony or chord construction, you'll understand what I'm saying there. But if not, doesn't matter, just be aware that over a dominant 7 chord, you can use a major pentatonic. So just using those 2 scales there, the major and minor pentatonic, we've actually got 4 scales that we can use for each of those chords. So, C major pentatonic, A minor pentatonic, D minor pentatonic, and G major pentatonic. And we can use those scales for any melodic content that we want to use over those chords. So that could be melodic bass lines, or any kind of bass line, fills, or even solos. So now I'll just play through the backing track again, but this time I'll outline those scales with some simple bass figures over each chord to give you an idea of how they'll sound in application. And all of this is tabbed out in the lesson workbook, so just follow the link in the info below. So here it is with the backing track. Now, as well as learning the pentatonic scales in these single 1-octave box patterns, it's really important to also learn them in a variety of positions all over the neck. You don't want to be confined to one tiny area. Now, don't worry too much about that right now. You just want to get these basic scale patterns under your fingers. But just be aware that they'll really start to come alive once you've branched out of that little box pan. So when you feel comfortable with these shapes, you can move on to my other lessons on pentatonic positions, which I'll also link to in the info below. Once you've started to branch out with your scale positions, you can start to incorporate fills and solos into your playing all over the neck. So I'll just give you a very quick example of how that might sound in the shape of a simple solo over the backing track. So that's the major and minor pentatonic scales. And while we're on the topic of scales, let me know what other scale topics you'd like me to cover in the comments below. Do you want to learn more about the major scale, the modes, maybe a bit more info on applying scales in your playing? Just let me know in the comments. Okay, so like this video if it's helped, and subscribe to the YouTube channel for notifications on my weekly releases. I release a new lesson every Friday and I live stream every Saturday. So come along and join in, and I'll see you next week.